Tech, and we've got some wonderful panelists here this morning about a discussion on salaries in tech. So I'm going to real quickly see if I can share my screen here, and we can go ahead and get started. And just because of lack of time this morning, I know we got started a little bit earlier. I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker than normal. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. There we go. Cool. Thank you. All right. So let's talk salaries in tech. So our panelists this morning, Damian Montero, Senior Architect and Organizer of the BocaJS, Todd Albert, Founder and Lead Instructor at Boca Code, Sarah Nohe, the Head of Customer Experience Strategy at REEF, and Dwight Goins, App Dev Manager at JM Family Enterprises. And our sponsor this morning, it's this community coffee is being presented by the South Florida Business and Wealth magazine. A little bit about our organization, Palm Beach Tech Association. Our mission and vision is to build South Florida into a tech hub. Again, our sponsor, South Florida Business and Wealth. I don't think they're on here with us this morning, so if you are, please let me know. Our community creed. So Palm Beach Tech is wholeheartedly committed to building a welcoming, collaborative, and inclusive community for all. We put inclusivity first, engage with others, and are considerate to all and don't sell to people. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about our community creed, our organization, please visit palmbeachtech.org. A little bit about our membership and organization. We are a nonprofit membership association. We currently have about 200 corporate members from our coding schools, our universities, our colleges, to a lot of our local headquartered companies here. And again, our mission is to build a tech hub, so bringing all these pieces together. Here's some of our current members. These are a lot of our premier members. So we've got like Todd from Boca Code on here this morning, Office Depot, City Furniture, Social Mobile, Brick, DSS. There's a bunch of them there for you to view. And there is a membership directory page if you'd like to see more of them on our website. A little bit on the membership. Again, I'm not going to go through everything, but for our corporate members, we have exclusive speaking opportunities such as this morning, our membership portal, different job listings, speaking opportunities, and much more. So again, you can go to palmbeachtech.org for more information. A little bit on our events. We have currently about 45 events every single week. So there's everything from our tech talks on Monday nights, community coffees on Tuesdays. We have podcasts every week on Wednesdays and our educational workshops on Fridays. For anybody looking for a job, we actually have a job listings page and our resume distributor, which sends your resume out to all of our members all at once on our careers page on our website as well.
But how much should they ask for salary?
Well, that's what we're going to find out this morning, huh? So our very active Slack page, you can find that at southfloridatech.com/Slack. Or if you'd like to be added to our e-newsletter, the easiest way to do that is actually text your email address to 561-250-7206.
Damien, are you on that Slack?
We never see
sometimes.
Him there. All right. So I want to get started by introducing our panelists. And I'm actually just going to start with whoever's first on my screen. So if you'd like to tell us your name, the organization you come from, and just a little bit on your background, and then we'll get started right into the Q&A. First person I have on my screen is Todd.
Hey everybody, Todd Albert. I'm the founder and lead instructor, one of the lead instructors here at Boca Code. And I came into tech in a kind of a non-traditional way. I actually am self-taught. I taught myself when I was 7 years old. Had my first kind of semi-professional gig when I was about 15. But then I went into academia and actually became a climate scientist studying glaciers. So I spent, almost 20 years of my life as a glaciologist, actually one of the top in the world, believe it or not. And I left academia mainly because in the US, salary. So I got into tech kind of mid-life, mid-career, I would say, and worked several different jobs, had my own agency, worked for some small startups all the way to some medium-sized and larger companies, and now have Boca Code School.
That is actually a pretty awesome background, Todd, so thank you. Next, I've got Damian.
Hi guys, hi team. My name is Damian Montero. I've been in the industry for about 22 years. I'm currently an IT architect at a small medical supplies firm and also the organizer of BocaJS, one of the biggest developer groups here in South Florida. Very proud of that. How did I get started? I really had no choice. My dad was a programmer, so it's a long lineage. And I simply had to continue on, I guess. Although it was pretty amazing when he also, like Todd, brought a computer home and set it up in my room and told me to use it. He was a programmer so long ago that he when he created his first databases, he didn't even use ones; it was all zeros. So that's it. I've had almost as many jobs as I've had the 20 years in the experience, so I have a lot to say with this, so can't wait to get started.
Thank you, Damian. Next, I've got Sarah.
Hello, good morning. So currently I work at REEF Technology, which is headquartered in Miami. I'm the head of customer experience strategy as of this last month, and have been there for about 1.5 years. I also run a community called Fluxia, which stands for Florida UX. Yeah. And we also have a mentorship program associated with that called Flux Hours to work with and talk to people in the UX discipline and help them understand where they want to go with their career, answer questions, things like that. I too started in sort of a more academic background. I have a career before I even entered tech that was more in the university system and within archaeology. And part of the reason I went into tech was just curiosity. I have an anthropology background and was interested in human behavior as it pertains to technology. But certainly a factor in that was I kept feeling like I was hitting ceilings and trying harder and harder to, work my way up in a different way. So salary was definitely a factor, but maybe not the only factor. And then I started my tech career. Actually, the first job I had was with Todd at an agency, and so learned a lot there, and have had a few jobs since then in technology.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. And of course, last but not least, I've got Dwight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Hello. So my name is Dwight. I am a Microsoft Regional Director and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. My skill set is a developer by trade and skill set. I started when I was pretty young out of, when was it? Roughly junior high school when I started coding. And the interesting topic about me or my background is I really started into the computer field on the infrastructure side, on the hardware side. I started building computers first, going into and tinkering in the garage of my father's his lab per se. He was an IBM developer way back in the 70s. And he always had computer equipment laying around and everything like that. And I didn't know what it was. So I just play with it and put pieces together and plug stuff up. And eventually my godfather had told me, stop all that hardware nonsense, get into software development. And at the time, software development wasn't cool at all. It wasn't a thing. It was just zeros, like Damian said, right? And so I was like, okay, this is not going to make any money. All the money at the time was in contacting, Chinese warehouses and trying to figure out how to get the cheapest part to put together and sell it for 10 times the amount of what you purchased it for. And that appeared to be where the money was. And to make a long story short, I'm so glad my godfather told me to go into software because of salary. I looked at my colleagues who had pretty much started kind of how I started from the School of Hard Knocks, not necessarily through academia per se. And, you know, I look at my salary compared to their salary. I'm like, haha, I got one up on you. So computer software and just the IT field itself has been a very booming field from, you know, the 80s to the 90s, and it still continues to be a booming field in my opinion. So that's me.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dwight. And I do want to give a shout out to Beth Wagmeister. If you see her on your screen, we've got a few deaf and hard of hearing people with us this morning. So she is wonderfully providing some ASL services for us. So thank you so much, Beth. All right, so we're going to get right into it. So these questions, unless I direct them to a specific person, they're basically for anybody. So any of you can go ahead and take these away. First question, we've already heard a couple comments here about different salaries, is how would you compare the salaries in tech to the average South Florida annual household income, which I believe right now the average is roughly 58,000. Do tech salaries in our region fit with our average cost of living?
Yes.
So I can have a short story about that if you don't mind. I had a good friend of mine that started in the business, very similar to Dwight. I started in hardware, more support. And right away I was 22 and I was making 45,000. A good friend of mine who was an accountant, again, junior, he was 23, wasn't making as much as me. And I didn't really quite understand why. I mean, what he was doing sounded very sophisticated and complex and advanced. What I was doing was simply, you know, playing with computers. And then continued on to, you know, my first programming. It always seemed to be that everybody around was slowly moving up to be able to achieve what it was easy to achieve in software.
Editor? No, I'll do it. I got it.
I can figure it out.
No,
I'm downloading it already.
I'm sorry. My apologies.
Mr. Two-Fish, there we go. Anybody else want to take on? Anybody else have stories of how their salaries compared to?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on which field in tech you're in. But the median, or when you look at, you said the average salary, the mean is in South Florida, like you said, might be 58, but I know statewide, the median is about 38,000. And when you look at in the tech field, it's more like 78. And when you look at the software engineering, it's 108. So, you know, when you look at the average statewide, or sorry, the median statewide of 38 versus a software engineer where the median is 108, there's a big discrepancy. And I think that's one of, you know, as Sarah said, it's not the only factor that why we left academia, but it certainly, you know, is a big draw. You know, one of the things too is it's not just, you know, that's an aggregate, right? There's the median or the mean, depending on what you want to measure, right? Is one way of looking at it. Another is and I think this is what Sarah was implying when she said it wasn't her only factor, but there's the room to grow, right? In let's say, you know, I spoke to a friend who was a teacher and she left teaching because she said she didn't want to be stuck in the 40 for 30 is what she called it, where, you know, you're going to be making in the 40, you know, in the 40K range for 30 years, right? And in tech, you know, we can't even imagine making 40K a year, better yet, staying there for 30 years. You know, there's so much room for us, you know, somebody who's been in tech for 30 years is going to easily be making 6 figures salary. So there's not just, you know, it's not just that maybe the starting salaries are higher, the average or median salaries are higher, but there's, you know, there's almost no cap, right? You know, you see like big, you know, CEOs of big tech companies that are some of the wealthiest people in the world. And, you know, and that's where, you know, everybody on this panel is in a position where they could get to that someday.
Yeah, I agree. I think that especially at the more sort of entry level, there tends to be sort of this skill set that you have that you can attach like very clear value to, and you can be hired into, you know, a company. After that, you're sort of proving yourself in other ways. And I think a lot of those soft skills come out, and that's where you can sort of also grow and change and demand more salaries, not because oh, I know how to code, or I know how to design. It's, or I know, how to build something. It's, you all of a sudden can command more and more because you have this skill, and then you've proven your worth in sort of other ways as well. And I think that entry into the tech field a lot of times is associated with that one skill that you can attach value to.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And actually, I'm going to skip a couple questions I hear in the Q&A just because, a couple of you had brought up kind of the different skill levels, the soft skills, all of that. So I'm just curious, as maybe to a couple of you here, I want to address this to Dwight first, is just as a hiring manager for a larger organization here in South Florida, what is your thought on like the quality of candidates that you're seeing come out of our tech programs here in South Florida?
That's a great question. Echo, put me on the spot on that one. I have mixed feelings on that because I get a lot of resumes from time to time, and a lot of times we are looking for very specific technology stacks, not general ones. So we'll say, for example, some of the core technologies that we use at JM is things like Salesforce and MuleSoft, and of course .NET, and a lot of Azure technologies. But that's like upcoming and current. If you had asked me that same question and you were asking me about, our current software stack last year, it would have been, AWS and MuleSoft, and that's it. And maybe, a little bit of Java here and there. And that was pretty much it. And so what I'm learning is that the industry is changing. And so for candidates who are giving their resumes, we're not really looking for just a broad range of things. We're looking specifically for the experiences in what we need at that moment. And so as far as what I see coming out of that pool, I see a lot of broad range stuff. And so it's kind of hard to understand and filter on who's going to be the best candidate when you have someone that, says, oh yeah, I've used Azure Functions for, a year. And then they go into AWS Lambda and then they talk about JavaScript. And it's like, okay, you're all over the place. Are you really good in Azure Functions? Because we need somebody like right away to do Azure Functions, let's say. And so I would say that as far as South Florida, we do see a lot of broadness on technologies, which is a good thing in certain aspects. And in other aspects, when we start to get resumes from, outside of the Florida landscape, we start to see more directed. And I think that's more so because of the recruiters and more so because of the points of where we receive the resumes. A lot of times the recruiters can go back and talk to the client and say, hey, build your resume specifically with these particular skill sets because that's what the client is looking for. And those tend to be the ones that get that extra second look and get brought in for a face-to-face, let's say, or in this case, virtual. Did that help?
Yes, that's a really good point. And I was actually, when you were talking, I was thinking of Todd, his workshop that he did on resume writing, because some of what you were saying was exactly the stuff he went over. So I thought that was a really good point. I actually wanted to address my next question to Todd was, you actually have a doctorate and were once a university professor, but now you're actually building a coding school here in South Florida. So can you tell us a little bit about your understanding, both from having formal degrees to boot camp certificates? Like, do you feel you would value a developer or, tech talent differently based on which educational background they come from?
Yeah, it's funny because Sarah I think Sarah kind of nailed it with what she was saying, that whether you come from a university background, and, I've had candidates who had bachelor's, like 2 bachelors and a master's in computer science, and another candidate that came from a boot camp. And, Damian's pointing to Dwight. The starting out, like Sarah said, for an entry-level position, both of them have a skill set that they can, you know, that they can lean on. But the way I see is both of them are really green and untested if it's a first job, right? The person coming from the boot camp is going to probably have a little more practical experience. The person coming from the academic background is probably going to have a lot more theoretical experience and knowledge. And those two on a team would be awesome together, right? I like to have that variety. But where are they going to be 2-3 years from now, right? And where are their salaries? You know, one of the things I worked really closely with two of those people for a long time, and the one who had that academic background, I felt like with her master's that like maybe she did demand more salary, but I didn't necessarily think she was like years better than the one who came from the boot camp in terms of salary. I thought that they were more equal in terms of their skill and what they brought to the company. So I think to start out, I would put them on relatively similar footing, because one's going to have, like I said, one's going to maybe be, you know, have more knowledge of algorithms and how to, you know, solve certain issues, whereas the other one's actually built stuff. And you know, but I want to see where they are a year or 2 years down the road before I really make that decision. But in some regards like that, you know, I demanded a much higher salary because I had a PhD. And I think that, you know, one of my colleagues, Janu, she was able to demand a higher salary because she has a master's in computer science. But does that make either of us better than somebody who, you know, is self-taught or went through boot camp? I don't think so. I think your experience, like Sarah said, you got to prove yourself. You have to be working, you know, Sarah, Damian, they're leaders in their respective communities, right? That says something. You know, you look at their jobs that they've had. You look at a job somebody's had. Did they go from job to job to job to job? Or were they 4 years with one company and, you know, became one of the senior developers there? So I think that, you know, once, you know, for your first position, your educational experience is really important. Beyond that, I think your job experience should be what takes precedence.
Yeah, that's perfect, Todd. I definitely agree with that, because I think obviously if you don't have the work experience yet, you kind of have to lean on the educational experience. But once you start getting the skills from work, that's kind of where you can differentiate yourself from somebody.
And just one more thing I want to add is that, you know, no two boot camps are equal, and no two, you know, CS degrees are equal, right? There are some CS degrees where they're still making you learn old technology. They're not really teaching, you know, relevant technology, although it might be relevant, like Dwight said, to the specific position that you're hiring. And you know, I've interviewed students out of boot camps that, you know, barely seem to know how to turn on a computer, and from another boot camp where they were rock stars. So, and no two students are equal, right? Two students can go through the same program and one comes out a rock star and the other is a dud. So, you know, it's hard to say. It really depends on the person.
Yeah.
I'd like to add another thing too, that a lot of this depends on is the position. So like at JM Family, we have positions that are for like employee or associates, as we call it. And then we have consulting or contracting positions. And for the associate position, I think a lot more is weighed on exactly what Todd said, how long you've been tenured at a place previously, you're a little bit about your academic background and just you as a person. Whereas with contract jobs and roles or consultant positions, a lot of times that's all about what you know now and you know how versed you are in that particular specific technology, because the demands are different, right? For an associate type of position, that's for the long term, that's for the long run. For the consultant role, that is, we need this task done like now. You need to help us and team get over the hump of building this next solution. And so we need this particular skill set now. So it really depends on the role, of the position that the candidate's trying to fulfill.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Perfect.
it boils down to what value you're bringing to the company, right?
Exactly.
Long-term and short-term.
Exactly. And actually, I wanted to address my next question to Damian, but it was actually something that Dwight had brought up, which of course, is something that at Palm Beach Tech we think about a lot, because I mean, again, our whole goal and mission is to build South Florida into a tech hub. But a lot of times in our discussions, a lot of people do compare us to other tech hubs across the country. And of course, as much as we here in South Florida don't like to hear it, we still hear about Silicon Valley. So, there's always been this hype over Silicon Valley, Damian. But since the pandemic, we've recently been seeing this change quite a bit, where maybe the things that you're hearing about that area aren't what it used to be. Can you speak to the differences between the salaries and some of the benefits of being, working at a South Florida tech job versus a Bay Area tech job? Like, is it worth all the hype of what we, heard or were hearing about Silicon Valley salaries?
Thank you, Nikki. That's a great question. I mean, the only thing I can tell you was sort of my story. There are others, of course, that have had different experience. What I did is I was working for ADP. They gave me a big bad severance package if I sort of with the closing the division. So I said it's time. I grabbed my family. We moved to San Francisco. I said, I'm in the web world. That's where San Francisco is at. It's the future. I had a friend of mine who was a VP at Salesforce. Let's do this. So I moved down there, and to my experience and to my surprise, I didn't feel what I feel here in South Florida, believe it or not. And it was every single thing that's they're famous for. Do they have an incredible salary? Well, I was making at that time, this is quite a while ago, $95,000 a year. And then I made the equivalent of 130 over there. Like, so it's you say, perfect, it's an instant increase in salary. That's fine, but like Todd shaking his head, it was an instant realization. I mean, I had a house here, I had to rent over there, but that every single thing seemed to be double the price. So if you worried about the price and you say, but I have a great job there, I felt it was a rat race. As many people have said, it's everybody's struggling to get everything done. They do amazing stuff. I was working at Skype, just an amazing company, a lot of benefits. And I know we'll talk about more about those things later. But at the very end, other than going out for a beer, a very expensive, fancy beer that I don't know if it was beer anymore, everybody seemed to want to go home. And I would go to these hackathons, as you know, I love them. And I would say, I'm willing to work my behind off 10, 12 hours a day, then come home and work on the next what's up and fail 5, 6, 7 times. Just so that the eighth time I will make that what's up and I will become rich. And I couldn't find that. So because of the weather, it was too cold, and because of other things, we came back here, and instantly, I mean, I saw that here. People like Dwight here do presentations on the most modern things. They do all sorts of different things, and I do feel that entrepreneurship, that want to do things on the side, is here. That's why I help run this BocaJS, but it doesn't need to be. With Palm Beach Tech and all the other groups, there's just an amazing amount of information that's coming here. So in my story, I didn't see the improvement that I saw in trying out, and I do see that here. But I would love to hear Dwight, because I know he has similar stories where he's tried different places, and look where he's ended up here. Dwight, tell us about it.
Yeah, so it's funny when you talk about, Nikki, when you talk and ask about Silicon Valley and that whole tech startup world, I was a part of that world. I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta for a couple of years and dropped out to create my own startup. But at the time, it was on building systems, building computers. I met a lot of people who founded. I met a couple of the founders of Earthlink, if you guys remember that. I met some people who started Alta Vista. And I also attended Georgia Tech for about a year, right? It was part of a dual degree. And so that whole vibe back in the early 90s was all about startup, get that next .com out there because you'll be a millionaire. And what I learned very quickly was you didn't become a millionaire because you made the product. You became a millionaire because you had some VC or some bigger parent company come and buy you out. And that became the thing. It no longer became building the product. It became built some vaporware to get it bought out, just so, you know, some big company can buy you out and you can go off on the island somewhere and live. And so I followed that trend for, I don't know, 10, 15 years, to the point where I even landed in, I went through 2 buyouts and was like that close to being the founder of a third. And, but the problem is that when you're not at the high level with the buyout, you don't make the millions of dollars, right? You only make the chump change. And what wound up happening was I followed these small companies to one small company out of New York that eventually got bought out. That was like this close to. And what I started learning was the atmosphere is exactly what Damian mentioned. It's you work 12, 13, 14, sometimes 18-hour shifts just straight, trying to, you know, make the client happy, make that product or whatever, in order to look good to the big parent that's getting ready to buy you out. And at the end of the day, you don't really have anything to show for it. There's no stability. It's just the atmosphere is a really fast paced, fast moving, and it's great if you're young and you don't have a family. And I like to talk about the work-life balance, as well as the cost of living, because that's an important aspect as you get older. At the time, I was living in Colorado, making New York money. I loved it. My girls loved it. Everybody loved it, but I was never home, right? Following this fast start, the startup tech type of design was, you know, we lived in a very low cost living in Colorado, making New York, Manhattan attorney style money. And at the end of the day, we didn't really have anything to show for it until we came down to Florida and we slowed down. And I got with a more stable company where it wasn't as fast. And now we have like cars, we have houses, we have way more stuff to show for it. It's weird. And I'm not making half of the amount of money that I was making in the fast startup life. So, you know, you have to kind of weigh the odds. The money came and went really, really quickly in that new tech life startup. But when I went to a more stable, slower moving type of company, the money is, I have savings account now. I didn't have a savings account back then. So it's really weird.
You know,
So
I
if you ever want
want
to move to the East Coast, don't do it. You'll end up like me and Dwight. And if you want to relax and enjoy yourself and do it the right way, look like these two over there, which obviously go and become a teacher.
Well,
No.
if you're young, right, you have that potential. There's always that 1 in a million chance that you become that one person, right? That Mark Zuckerberg or, you know, that Jeff Bezos that just gets this idea and then you just blow up like that. But it's really, it's like playing sports. It's like becoming a part of a national football league, right? It's like you're really good, but so are a million other people. And if you are that one person, you could do it. But then again, if you're the 99 other people that didn't get it, you know, it comes to that realization.
I want to add to that, to the work-life balance idea. Just, you know, your whole quality of life, there's the work-life balance, but there's also your atmosphere at work, right? So, you know, if somebody's paying you $1 million a year, you'll have a job where you're miserable and be okay with that, as long as when you're home, you know, you're living on that island. But when you're not making $1 million a year, you know, if you're you know, my first couple of years where I had my own agency, the agency that, you know, Sarah said that was her first job in tech, Damian actually did some work for us in the early years. Those early years at Nebular, it was such an awesome atmosphere. Everyone loved to work there. Things kind of shifted later on, which is actually when I got out of there. But early on, it was such a great atmosphere. People loved to work there. There was mentorship happening. There was, you know, kind of bottom up leadership. and people love to work there to the point where, and now I want to throw some real numbers in. We were hiring junior developers like right out of code school or right out of college at about 55K, which is on the lower end for starting salary for a junior developer. And I had one of our developers, Ryan, who I think Sarah, you and Ryan overlapped a little bit. Ryan told me recently, actually, he said it in a LinkedIn post, that at that time he had a job offer for 70K to work for a big company, you know, a company like a JM Family, but he opted to take less benefits, to take less salary, to get that mentorship. And you know, some of the developers that came to us, they wanted the variety because we were working on really cool projects. We weren't just working on one thing. We had Fortune 500 clients, and we had local startups. We were doing AR and VR, and we were doing game development, and we were also building simple websites and apps for clients. So, you know, there's more to your job than you know, than just your salary and the benefits. There's the atmosphere, there's who you're working with, what are you going to learn, what are you going to get to work on. So there's all of these things to consider. And you know, in this particular case, here was a guy, Ryan, who, and he says he says that he's so glad he did that he learned so much in those, you know, in the year or so that he was at Nebular, that it was worth, you know, 15K a year salary difference, right? Yeah, doing the math, right? And all the benefits to have that atmosphere and to learn and have that mentorship and get to work with the people he worked with. So, you know, there's other considerations from the perspective of, you know, we're talking a lot from like the hiring manager perspective, right? Like you have to have the specific skill sets that are needed. And I think that's important too. You know, at Nebular, you know, you had to have the skills that we were looking for, although we were also able to hire more variety because we had more variety of projects.
I also think there's something else there too, like the fact that in a lot of different industries, you're offered a job and it's like, wow, I was offered a job. In tech, even as someone who has just learned, you know, what they're doing the past couple months, you can actually talk to a number of different companies and have an offer. And that is especially true the more senior you get. So it's a mistake, I think, for any hiring manager to think if they offer someone a job that person is like lucky to get the job. And I've had a lot of people turn down jobs and salaries that I thought were like really amazing offers. And they're like, no, sorry, like I have this other offer and I want to take it. Sometimes it's not based on money. Sometimes it's based on, you know, the structure of the company is different, or they want to learn something specific. But they are, especially right now, in the position to make those determinations and not desperate to take, you know, whatever offer comes their way, which I think is amazing.
That's a really important point too, Sarah. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And something else, you know, that I wanted to talk about here, which I think actually all of you at one point have brought up throughout this conversation, is just startups. So I mean, South Florida is actually, I think, one of the top, if not the top area for startups. And you know, I'm just wondering about the differences between the pay rates for startups compared to larger companies that are more well established. Sarah, do you have any, you know, opinion on that or a point of view? Because I know you've worked for both.
Yeah, I mean, I currently work for a startup now, technically, but we have, you know, 15,000 employees. So even the idea of a startup, the way I used to think about it was like, you know, 20 people building shit together and trying to make something work. And that's really an incorrect perception. So I think that whether it's a startup or not, everyone has a specific budget, and they're trying to sort of play this game of making sure that they are within the salary that is competitive, but they don't want to overspend. And so I was speaking to someone on our hiring team recently who mentioned that there's a lot of new jobs within talent acquisition around like doing the math and creating algorithms based on what offers should be. And like, there's a whole new industry that's kind of blowing up around that. So.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Dwight.
I would add to that. In my days working with startups, there was always the salary seemed to be just a bump lower. And what they did was is they offered a lot of package deals. They offered percentages in the company. And, you know, in my opinion, being young at the time, it was they offered the potential of making X amount of more dollars later. Right. They offered the potential of the buyout, the potential of, oh, if you put this product out, you know, you'll making X amount of commission on top of this, even though you're not a salesperson. Right. And it was always geared with all of these. I call it vaporware because it was the potential of, if it does well, you'll be making X amount of dollars. Whereas a lot of times the bigger companies from now being older and being in these other more stable companies, I'm learning that the salary tends to be a slowly, gradually increasing amount, where you know you'll get promotions and you'll get bonuses, and at the end of the day, it seems like you make more money with the slower companies over time, whereas you get great potential with a lot of the startups.
But I think also like when you're offering or when you're taking sort of an equity play or something like that, to me, it's not if we do like if it does well, you'll do well. It's more so like, hey, like join this and like help build this thing so that we can all do like it's more so like the signal to me is that like you're going to be part of a thing and we want you to have some like, you know, accountability for making it great.
Stake in the game, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
And I did want to actually add to this because the next question I had on here was just about that, like about, you know, the ability for the startups to grow and offering more benefits and the difference in salaries and all of that. But, you know, Michelle, which I have to give her a shout out, Michelle Backles, she was actually the one to help put all of this together this morning. You know, she had a good question there, was just that when we're talking around, you know, talking about salary raises, benefit packages, ability to move up the corporate ladders, what are some of the benefits that a larger company has versus what a startup may have? I mean, even a lot of people bring up, okay, maybe the larger companies have better benefit packages, but maybe a startup company is working on newer technology that's more fun and interesting or something. Can you guys talk about some of the other differences there?
Well, as a startup, one thing, you know, is like at Nebular, for example, I had, you know, people come in, you know, that were like the developer, you know, or one of the developers. And, you know, suddenly they were like, you know what, I want to focus on mobile. And so as we brought in more developers, we would be able to put them focused on mobile. And then those developers would be like, ooh, you know, I really like working on games. Okay, now you're a game developer. And I think that at a larger company, there's maybe less ability to laterally move like that. There might not be, like, there may be a flatter structure at a startup where, you know, you're not going to be able to inch up the hierarchy because there's not that many steps on the ladder. You've got, like, you know, the employees and the owner, you know, and that's it. But that means that you could come in and kind of come in at almost a director role, right? Because as we hire more people, they're going to be hired probably underneath you as you're getting more experience. So in a way, you know, I feel like at a larger company, you kind of have to claw your way up the ladder, whereas at a startup, you might get pushed up the ladder. So I think that's a difference. As long as you know, you have the skills and you're contributing, right?
Yeah, certainly when I'm hiring now, I'm hiring for the person, like I'm hiring for their characteristics, their skill set, like all of these things I'm bringing to the table, but not necessarily for a job. Like if I put them in a role, that eventually might change. They might not, you know, be happy there. They might find something else that they're very good at. They might add value somewhere else. And so the idea is like, okay, if that job doesn't work, like let's shift it a little bit. Let's let you, you know, play a different role. Whereas when you're working with, you know, a corporate environment, you're hired for like a very specific role that has, you know, a number attached to it, and you're doing that job. Most of the time.
That's Sarah. That's so perfect. And Damian and I had a conversation, you know, just a few weeks ago where I was, you know, I had this role and I had this person I wanted to hire, but I was also thinking, you know, what about Michelle Bagels, you know? And I talked to Damian and he was like, oh my God, if you could get Michelle, that's like, why would you even question that? I'm like, yeah, why would I even question that? So again, hiring the person, like I didn't even say like, oh, I have this, like you said, Sarah, there wasn't this narrow role I needed to fit. It was just this thought like, oh my God, Michelle Bagels, like she could add so much to Boca Code. I need her. I need to get her on my team. And so there was a perfect case of hiring the person and not the position.
I'd like to add to it from just a different perspective.
With
Oh, go ahead, Damien.
no, go Dwight.
I think you're both right, Todd and Sarah. I think from an enterprise perspective, you're right, but the way the enterprise looks at it as if the enterprise has you as an associate or an employee, then you're not stuck in the role. It's not as fast as a startup where, you know, if you're if you're brought in as a mobile developer and then all of a sudden you're going to switch over to game, it can happen. It takes time, right? You might spend 2 years on a project and identify an opportunity to move over to something else. And if you're brought on as an employee, then those opportunities are definitely there. If you're brought on as a consultant, then that's when they pinpoint you and say specifically, which is kind of how I started, right? When I'm hiring, if the role I'm hiring for is a consultant, I need a specific set of skill sets. If the role I'm hiring for is an associate, then that's a long-term play. And in that scenario with the associate, then no, you have many roles that you can go through. You can become a director, you can jump to a manager, you could be a developer, you could be a Q&A person, and you can keep the same salary doing different roles, right? And it's just, as an associate, it's a completely different ball game than if you're a contractor.
Thank you so much, Dwight. And actually,
to that point, I mean, you know,
oh, go ahead. Were
I
you
don't know
going to say,
if I
Damian?
lost everybody.
Sorry,
Quickly, one quick thing. There is movement that is capable. This is my little friend here. Sorry. There is movement capable on large enterprises. We can talk about specifically Dwight. Dwight used to be my coworker, and all of a sudden he became my boss when we were working at JM Family. And then ADP, I took the severance package when they closed down my division. The other architect in my team decided to take over, similar to Dwight, a developer manager role. So there is always movements. What you don't, and you should think about when it comes to enterprises, large enterprises, is that it's obvious, like it's Lego pieces. So if you feel you can fit into this Lego piece, there is a list, and if you can simply apply, and then most enterprises will allow you to switch between those two, you know, with your manager's approval, with everybody being okay, right? There's could be some politics as far as your manager saying, I don't mind losing this individual and you moving him there. So I've had a lot of experience in both startups and enterprise. I found that in both, getting back some to the salary discussion, you move forward in salary by changing roles. I've not been in too many places where there is that promised $10,000, you know, bonus or something because something really happened. I've been in startups where they promised that, didn't see it. I've been in enterprises that they promised that they did deliver, but the bonuses are small, right? It's not car, it's new laptop. So, you know, just for the other developers to give you a basis. So,
Stickers.
you know, perfect.
You got lots of stickers here at Boca Code.
And we are actually right at time. So what I'd love to do is just to finish up here, because I know we had a few questions come through the chat and private chat, is just really quick rapid fire. If I could have you each answer just 2 questions, would be where would be the best place to find resources on salaries or skill levels? And then what would be your top thing as a hiring manager that would immediately make somebody more valuable to you?
Oof. I would say for value yourself highly. I think that, you know, I'm not going to answer your question, but I'll just give my last two thoughts is number one is when you're starting out, focus on what job you want, not salary. And then number two is once you get established, then you can demand a higher salary and value yourself highly.
I'll go next. You can always look at other jobs in DICE or any one of those listing jobs there. If this job you feel is too low of a pay, look out for other similar ones. They may be too low or just may be the right amount. Don't be afraid to negotiate, especially with recruiters. They have a tremendous amount of money, especially when they tell you they have zero bit of money just above you. They probably have $20 way above what they're actually offering you. Don't ask them for $20 more an hour than what you're actually making, but don't be afraid to ask for changes. I've had companies that say they have zero thing, and then when I said, oh, okay, I love it, I think it's the best job in the world, but I'm just going to go to this other company, and there all of a sudden $15 an hour came out of that that they had zero movement on. So just be aware of that. You know what I mean?
It's also, as a female, I've been reading a lot about women do not negotiate or tend not to negotiate. So that goes for everyone to negotiate because there's billions of dollars being left on the table for lack of negotiation.
And I would add, when you see a position, read through the position, make sure you understand what the role is for. Because if the role is, you know, employee based, then that's a little bit different than if the role is more of a contract position. And Damian is absolutely right. Negotiate your rates. Sarah is absolutely right. Negotiate your rates. A lot of the recruiting firms, they do have bumper room that they can, you know, make you happy. So negotiate, pay attention to the position that you're going after, and sell yourself. That's all I could tell you.
Very good. Thank you so much to all of you, you know, meaning even the audience for attending, you know, early, bright and early in the morning, all the panelists as well. I'm sure we could have talked for another 2 hours about this topic. So thank you so much. And I will make sure to send a follow-up email. So if any of you here on the panel do have resources, links, information that you'd like to send to me, please do so. And I'll make sure that gets to our audience today. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Nick.
Michelle,
Thanks,
for a
everyone.
great topic.